It's a Tuesday night, and it's pretty extraordinary to get anyone to show up to a conversation about economics and energy policy. So I think that's wonderful. And thanks, Ash, and for your great space. I'm sort of humbled. You think of positive spaces as like radicals planning how to shut down pipelines, which it should be, I hope, as well.
Saturdays.
Saturdays. I'll come back to that. But I think we're at a really interesting inflection point in climate change, and the paper we're going to discuss as of 4 minutes ago is really, I think, exciting in the sense that, you know, the principal narrative of the last few decades is we can't afford to solve climate change is really not true. So we're going to talk about New Zealand and rewiring Aotearoa. The report that we're releasing here is hopefully going to be a template for what we do at Rewiring Australia, where I also spend a lot of my time and following shortly after Rewiring America, and that's the journey backwards of how I got here. Started Rewiring America in 2019 to help the Democrats say climate change without wincing was our original. We were just going to be a comms campaign for 6 months, and then for our efforts, we earned a seat at the table on day one of the White House, and they said we want to do big climate policy, and so we rolled up our sleeves and became a policy org. And really, it's all around the theory of electrifying everything for everyone, and really that is the topic of the conversation. So I arrived at this also by writing these books on electrification. Electrify was written for an audience of one, that was to Joe Biden. Big Switch was for an audience of 27 million. It's the same book as Electrify, but it's written in Bogan for Australians. And the quarterly essay is a rumination on the community benefits of electrification, including community economics, and in some respects the paper today is a bigger version of that. All of it ultimately comes because I'm a super energy nerd. This is the one slide I'm going to quiz you on at the end of the night. This is all energy flow through the US economy from the left, where the oil and the coal and the gas and the solar and the nuclear are input, all the way over to the right, which is where we live, where we do things like drive cars, cook food, live in homes, run businesses. And that it was this energy analysis that underpins a lot of the work that the rewiring is doing. Because when you look at this and you think, how do the humans keep doing all the things that they want to do here, but do it with zero emissions? The answer is electrification. So that brings us to this, the electrification opportunity. Also want to call out Josh Ellison, who did a huge amount of heavy lifting on the writing of this paper and the data processing, and Michelle Pawson, who did a huge amount of work running the ship and making sure all the words were in the right place and contributing some big ideas. So thank you both, and also great that we now have Paul as one of the world's first economists to sort of lean into the new ideas presented here. So global emissions is really an energy problem, and in fact probably 75, maybe given that industrial processes will become electric and so will waste, a lot of the waste problems, it's really maybe the energy problem is maybe 80% of the problem, and we know that probably 90% of that energy problem will be solved through electrification, maybe 95. And this may sound really reductionist, but I think it's useful to be reductionist. At the end of the day, this is all a machine's problem. There are machines in our economy that burn fossil fuels, and we need them to stop burning fossil fuels, and we don't want to stop all of human activity, so what are we going to replace those machines with? And this is an argument that we can now replace the machines in our lives with electric machines. To win, there's two kinds of machines. So again, there's the Sankey diagram underneath. Supply side machines, these are the big expensive machines in the economy, the coal generators, the gas generators. There's thousands of those. They cost $1 million to $1 billion each. Some people think they're going to be the hard to decarbonise, but there's actually corporate boards with responsibility agendas that have to do that. On the demand side, this is where we live. There's actually millions of machines, or if the count in the US is 1 billion, in Australia 100 million, and New Zealand about 10 million. That's your cars, your water heaters, your space heaters. And this is, we're really going to focus on those. You really have to decarbonise both of these things at the same time. And really, most economists traditionally, and most work is focused on the left-hand side, not the right-hand side. So we're really bringing the demand side into focus. New Zealand emissions are a little bit unique. You're very heavy on agriculture, so that's your dairy product and meat product exports. We don't have all electric cars and sheep yet, so we're going to say this is a reason to emphasise getting the emission reductions we can now, so that hopefully the technologies and solutions on that side will solve themselves. And of your domestic economy, 31% of the emissions are decisions made around your kitchen tables. That's what you drive, how you heat your home, where you get your electricity from, and we're going to focus on those as near-term emission reductions that you can hit now to hit our climate targets. Bad news is a lot of work to do. Good news is these electric machines are super efficient. And what I mean is, since the 1970s, we had an energy crisis, and the answer was efficiency. If we all lived in slightly smaller, slightly colder houses, and we drove less in smaller cars, we would be slightly less fucked. It might be the way that you would summarise 50 years of energy policy in the West. And you can see with all the efficiency, so if you double the efficiency of your house, you go from needing 85 kilowatt hours per day for all of your household energy uses to about 83. And that's because the majority of energy use in the house is actually your vehicles, that big grey block there. And the only thing that the efficiency really does is that little red block at the bottom, which is your space heating. Electrification is the efficiency we were always looking for. So driving an electric car powered by renewables, we use about a quarter of the energy of a petrol car. Using a heat pump to heat your water, heat pump to heat your home, use about a quarter of the energy of doing it with fossil fuels. And so without really any of the traditional efficiency things, but going all electric, you get this huge energy reduction to only about 25 kilowatt hours per day per household. And that drives the even better news that these machines can save us money. And a lot of it is because of that high efficiency. This is basically all of the price of all of the fuels that go into running a household. That's your gas, that's the coal that runs the electricity, that's the grid electricity, and you can see petrol and diesel in brown. Over the last 20 years, 25 years, they've all risen faster than inflation, and we have felt that in our pocketbooks. So energy is now a cost of living issue in New Zealand as it is elsewhere. But here is the outline of an answer. We now know from the Australian experience, and to a lesser degree the New Zealand experience, that rooftop solar finance is cheaper at delivering electricity to your house than the grid. And even if you add a battery, that's the green line, it's cheaper than the grid. And the other extraordinary phenomenon that's going on here is that it locks in that price in the future. So the global energy transition can be seen as the substitution of finance for fuels. You used to buy a cheap machine and feed it expensive fuels. Now you buy 25 years of solar up front, and you finance it, and so you fix your costs. This is going to have big impact on price stability, which probably Paul will answer his own questions on because he's more qualified than I. But it is a very interesting phenomenon, and this is one of the main benefits we're touting. In terms of a household, those things mean that your big efficiency win, the chance to have this solar contribute part of your electricity cost, shows that a New Zealand household, the first two columns today, slightly different depending on whether they burn LPG, bottled gas, or line gas. A fossil fuel house in New Zealand is $19,000 or $18,000 a year to run. If you're doing it all electrically, you'll probably be about $17,000 a year. If you're financing that at 5.5%, you'll save about $1,500 a year. And if you've got 1% financing, in a magical world we could make exist with policy settings, you'd probably save a lot more than that. So this is to emphasize that in this new finance world, finance is critical. To put an emphasis on where the savings are, this is the picture of cost of driving a car. The red is the cost of driving a car 100 kilometres over the last 25 years, up and to the right, which is not a good thing, projected to increase faster. You can now see that incredible yellow line is a car charged off rooftop solar. So it costs you 2 or 3 cents a kilometre to drive that electric vehicle on New Zealand sunshine instead of 25 or 30 cents a kilometre running a petrol engine car. Even running it off the grid, which is more expensive electricity, still a substantial savings. And this really speaks to sector coupling. We tried to think about the energy industry in terms of the transport sector, the residential sector, the electricity sector, the industrial sector. And sector coupling means those boundaries are now a bit fluid, because this car is going to be plugged into a home or into a small business in the commercial sector or the residential sector, and it's coupled to the electricity sector at the same time. Same sort of pictures for water heat. I'm going to go pretty quick. And this is the incredible story of the very cheap energy cost. There's on the bottom there. This is not including the finance cost, but that's the red is the cost of all your energy for gas, LPG, petrol, electricity in a fossil fuel powered household. Blue is for an all electric. And here's the cost if you put the capex in. So the big grey block at the bottom, that is your capex, your upfront costs. So the electric vehicles cost a bit more, the heat pump water heater costs a bit more, but even with the financing, which is the grey bit, and the financing will be a bit more in the new house, those very, very low energy costs because the electrification machines are so cheap and the electricity compared to petrol and diesel is so cheap, you're coming out ahead. So this is true for a single home or a household in New Zealand today, and in fact could be true for all of them. So we then did the work of aggregating what this looks like for every household in New Zealand, and these are what are called adoption curves that we need to do that. What is an adoption curve? It's the rate at which these machines will become 100% of the fleet. So you can see on the bottom there, only about 5% of cars in New Zealand are electric today. We need them to be basically 100% electric by 2040 to hit a 1.5 to 2 degree climate target. Nearly half of your electric space heating is already electric. That's the pink line, but we need to finish that job. Same with water heating, same with electric cooking, and then we need to add the new things, the rooftop solar and the batteries. So we used this model, which is basically the idea that the next time someone in New Zealand's old Volvo dies, we help them get an electric vehicle. The next time you're doing a kitchen renovation, you update to electric induction, and you just sort of replace everything at end of life. It would actually help us hit our climate target, but it would actually generate this extraordinary cumulative savings. The savings increase in the future because the cost of the battery, the cost of the solar, cost of the EVs is going down, but also the number of households that can do it is going up. And you can see by the end of this decade, New Zealand will be saving $3 or $4 billion a year, and by 2040, $10+ billion a year. And in fact, if you went all in as a nation on electrification as a strategy, it would help you hit your climate target, which is good. You can have a moral argument about that. But finally, you don't have to have an economic argument because the country would save $95 billion over that period of time. And from our experience of doing this modelling for the last 4 years, we've always underestimated the cost reductions that are happening in batteries and solar. So the picture, every time we do the math gets better. And every time you think the fossil fuel prices are going to stabilise, they get higher and more volatile. And so it might even be a better picture than this. So this reminds me of our first slide, which was electrify everything for everyone. What I want to say about that is a lot of people are concerned about climate justice and social justice issues, and I now see it as a question of access to finance. You can't half solve climate change if only the 50% of wealthiest households can do it. And so some people will be won't be able to get the credit access, some people won't be able to get the cash, and we need to figure out financing mechanisms at nation state levels to help every household achieve these savings. After all, the households that would benefit the most from these savings are the ones that are doing it tough in cost of living crisis. Just to reflect on Rewiring America, I ended up getting a fist bump this guy for all of a second and a half on the White House lawn, the launch of the IRA. But I want to just reflect quickly on the IRA. This was how they gauged the policy when it launched, $369 billion in spending on climate, the great majority, about $320 billion on electrification. But in fact, it hides the fact that a much, much larger amount of money was going to be done. So there are tax concessions. You give someone $3,500 discount on an electric car with a tax concession, they have to spend $30,000, so you're getting $10 of private capital for each dollar of government capital. So actually that $369 billion was going to move $2 trillion. But this is actually a calculator we built at Rewiring America that shows you all of these tax concessions. So for my house in San Francisco, I actually qualify for $33,000 worth of tax concessions. Americans, I suspect, like New Zealanders and Australians, love tax rebates. No surprise, the data came out 2 years after the Act last week, and these things are selling out about 5 times faster than the budget office guessed. And because of that, it actually looks like it's going to deploy closer to $6.5 trillion by the IRA, another $3 trillion investments in the supply chain. And this is a little bit of story about how governments can justify big investments here because it's going to move a huge amount of capital on the private sector side to actually do the work of this decarbonisation. So I don't know exactly the perfect policy prescriptions. Hopefully with the three of us on stage in a minute, we'll get there. And there you go, all backwards. Rewiring our terrain, it's worth doing, and I think I will end on the idea that New Zealand is, in my perspective, because I've lived in America for the last 20 years and recently in Australia, politically, I think, you might think it's all difficult here, but it's more difficult elsewhere. And I think you have a really good argument here to come from behind, to be a big leader on climate action. And it's places like New Zealand that have incredible renewable resources, including your hydro, that give you a big advantage. In Australia, our advantage is sunshine. Here, it's your hydro. But as smaller nations where the macroeconomic story is flipped, like I've said, I think it's now our turn to show the world how to do it. And so I'm going to give you all a bit of a nudge. Get out there and push your policy makers, because you could make this happen.